The first time my husband said something out loud that I had only ever thought in the dark, 43 people went completely still. Forks stopped moving. Someone's wine glass hovered halfway between the table and their lips, and never made it either direction. My aunt, who had talked through every family event for the past 20 years, said nothing. And Marcus, my brother, the one everyone in my family had been carefully building a life around since before I knew what careful meant, sat at the far end of the table and stared at Ryan like he'd just been read a verdict he hadn't prepared for. Ryan didn't raise his voice. He never does. He just held up the folder, looked out at the room, and said, "Before we finish tonight, there are some things this family needs to see. I want to tell you I was brave in that moment. I want to say I sat up straight and felt strong and certain. The truth is my hands were folded in my lap, and I was pressing my thumbnail into my palm just hard enough to feel it, because it was the only thing keeping me from crying in front of every aunt, uncle, and cousin I had ever known. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I've been a CPA for 5 years, the kind of job where you spend your days fixing other people's numerical mistakes and making sure the numbers say what they're actually supposed to say. I live in Columbus, Ohio. Close enough to my parents that Sunday dinner is a reasonable ask, and far enough that I once convinced myself the distance was the same as independence. It wasn't. Growing up, my brother Marcus was the sun my family orbited. He's 3 years older than me. Tall, easy with a smile. The kind of person who could disappoint someone and still walk away with them liking him more than when he arrived. My parents didn't call it favoritism. My mother called it recognizing potential. My father called it supporting ambition. What they actually meant was that Marcus wanted things loudly, and I wanted them quietly. And in my family, volume was the same as value. I learned early how to make myself useful without taking up space. I got good grades because that was expected. I got a scholarship because that was expected. I got a stable job and paid my own way and asked for almost nothing because asking felt like a transaction I was never sure I could afford. Marcus, by contrast, asked constantly, boldly, with the casual confidence of someone who had never once been told the answer was no. When Ryan and I got engaged 2 years ago, my mother cried the good kind of tears. My father shook Ryan's hand for a long time and looked at him the way men of his generation look at someone they've decided to trust. Marcus texted me a thumbs-up emoji. At the time, I thought that was just Marcus being Marcus. I didn't understand yet that it was something else. It was someone who had already decided I was irrelevant to the math he was doing. Ryan is an estate attorney. He works with trusts, wills, asset transfers, the paperwork people create to protect the people they love, and the paperwork other people use to quietly redirect what was never meant for them. He has a way of listening that makes people feel heard, and a way of reading documents that makes people feel caught. He is the single most methodical person I have ever met in my life, and for most of our relationship, I thought that was just a professional trait. Then came the day it became personal. It started at my grandmother's funeral last March. My grandmother, Dorothy, was a woman who kept receipts. Not just the paper kind, the human kind. She remembered who showed up and who didn't. She remembered who called when they said they would, and who made excuses. She had a handwritten ledger she kept in her bedside table that tracked every birthday card she sent, every phone call, every visit. I know because she showed it to me once when I was 16 and told me, "Claire, the people who show up when there's nothing in it for them, those are the ones worth keeping." When she died, she left behind a modest house outside of Dayton, a savings account, some jewelry, and a trust she had set up 11 years earlier. The trust had 2 beneficiaries, Marcus and me. My mother had mentioned it in passing once when I was in college, the way she mentioned a lot of things briefly, offhandedly, like the information didn't require my full attention. "Grandma set something aside for you kids, for when you're ready for something big. A house, a business, something real." I had nodded and filed it away in the part of my brain where I kept things I wasn't supposed to ask about directly. At the reception after the funeral, my uncle pulled me aside. He's my grandmother's brother, the only one on her side still living, a quiet man with enormous hands and the habit of saying difficult things gently. He asked if I'd been in touch with the estate attorney. I told him I hadn't yet. He looked at me in a way I didn't fully understand and said, "Make sure you do that soon, sweetheart." Then, someone called his name across the room, and he squeezed my arm and walked away. Ryan noticed. He notices everything. On the drive home, while I was staring at the highway and thinking about my grandmother's hands and the ledger she kept and the sound of her laugh, he said quietly, "Your uncle seemed concerned." I told him what the man had said. Ryan didn't respond immediately. He just nodded in that careful way he has, the way that means he's already thinking 3 steps ahead of the conversation we're currently having. The estate was supposed to take about 6 weeks to process. Our family had used the same attorney for years, a man named Gerald Whitfield, who had an office on the 2nd floor of a building downtown and a habit of addressing every legal document like it was a formal letter to a head of estate. I expected to receive paperwork in the mail the way I always received formal things in an envelope with instructions, all very procedural and uncomplicated. Instead, I got a phone call from Gerald in week 3. He was careful with his words, the way attorneys are when they're delivering information they're legally required to deliver but personally uncomfortable about. He told me he had some documentation to walk me through. He said it would be better to do it in person. He said to bring someone with me if I could. I brought Ryan. The meeting was on a Wednesday afternoon. Gerald's office smelled like old paper and good coffee, and he shook our hands and closed the door and did not offer us anything to drink, which told me more about what the next hour was going to be like than anything he said. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a copy of the original trust document, dated 11 years ago. 2 beneficiaries, split evenly. My name, Marcus's name, $50,000 each, to be held until each of us made a qualifying major life purchase. A home, a business, an education. Standard structure. Clean language. My grandmother's signature at the bottom in her careful, looping script. Then Gerald slid a second document across the desk. I looked at it. Then I looked at Ryan. Then I looked at Gerald. The second document was a request for early disbursement, filed 14 months ago. The signature line had my mother's name on it in her capacity as a trustee. The disbursement amount was $48,000. The recipient was Marcus. The stated reason was a qualifying business investment. I said, "What business?" Gerald looked at his hands. There was a filing submitted at the time, an LLC registered in Nevada. It appears to have been dissolved approximately 4 months after the disbursement. Ryan asked, very calmly, if he could see the LLC filing. Gerald had a copy. The business listed in the filing was a real estate investment company. It had 1 member, Marcus. It had been registered in February, received the disbursement in March, and filed dissolution paperwork in July. 7 months total. $48,000 in, nothing out. I sat in that chair in Gerald's quiet office and I thought about my grandmother showing me that ledger. I thought about the way she said the people who show up when there's nothing in it for them. I thought about the fact that she had sat down 11 years ago and made sure that I had something waiting for me. Something she built carefully and deliberately. And I thought about how that something was now gone. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Does my grandmother's trust document authorize my mother to make that decision unilaterally? Gerald looked genuinely pained. The trustee structure has dual authority requirements. Any disbursement over $25,000 was supposed to require both your mother and your father as co-trustees to sign off. Did my father sign? Gerald's pause was its own answer. There is a signature on the approval form. Our office is looking into the authentication of that signature. Ryan had gone very still beside me, the way he goes still when he's paying the most serious kind of attention. I knew that stillness. It meant he was already working. I didn't cry in Gerald's office. I thanked him. I took copies of everything he was legally permitted to give me. I shook his hand. And then Ryan and I walked to the parking garage in total silence, and I sat in the passenger seat of our car and looked at my hands for a long time. She built that for me, I said finally. I know, Ryan said. She saved that money for years. She didn't have much, Ryan. She was careful and she saved, and she set it aside specifically for... I know, he said again. And he reached over and covered my hand with his and didn't say anything else. Because there wasn't anything else to say right then. He waited until that night to ask questions. We sat at the kitchen table with my copies spread out between us and 2 cups of coffee going cold, and he asked me everything he needed to know in the sequence he needed to know it. When was the LLC filed? What did Marcus do for work? Had my parents ever mentioned the trust in recent years? Had Marcus recently made any large purchases I knew about? I thought about it. Last fall, Marcus had bought a boat. He'd sent the family group chat a photo of it in a marina somewhere near Lake Erie, grinning with a beer in his hand, captioning it, "Finally did it." My mother had replied with 17 exclamation points. My father had sent a gif of someone giving a thumbs up. I had liked the photo and felt the familiar low-grade ache of being on the outside of a celebration whose funding source I was never supposed to think about too hard. I told Ryan about the boat. He looked at the disbursement date, then at the approximate timing of the boat purchase, and he nodded once slowly. "There might be more to the LLC story," he said. "The dissolution paperwork is fast. Very fast. Someone knew exactly how to structure this to look like a qualifying use without technically being one." I stared at him. "Are you saying someone helped him set this up?" Ryan met my eyes. "I'm saying I'd like to look at a few more things before we talk to anyone." He spent the next 2 weeks doing what he does quietly. He pulled the Nevada LLC records, which are public. He looked at the registered agent, which was a generic service company used by thousands of filings, but the initial filing had a preparer's signature, a name he recognized from documents my parents had used for their own business years ago. He called Gerald back with specific questions about the authentication review on my father's signature. He asked Gerald, very carefully, whether my mother had any prior history of sole trustee actions on the account. Gerald confirmed she did. One prior disbursement, 3 years ago, smaller amount. Reason listed: Marcus's education expenses. Marcus had finished college 6 years ago. I sat with that information for 2 days. I went to work. I reviewed balance sheets for clients who paid me to find exactly this kind of discrepancy in their own financial records, and I sat at my desk thinking about the particular cruelty of being good at a job that showed you exactly what had been done to you. I had not spoken to my mother since the funeral beyond the routine messages families exchange to confirm they are still alive and functional. "How are you?" "Fine. How are you?" "Dad's knee is better. Glad to hear it." I had not called Marcus. I wasn't sure what I would say if I did. I knew what I wanted to say. I had the full CPA version and the daughter version and the sister version, and none of them felt complete. Ryan came home one Thursday evening with a look I had learned to recognize over 3 years of marriage. Not excited, not angry. Focused. He set his laptop on the table and sat down and said, "I need to show you something." He had found the text thread. It was part of what Gerald's discovery process had turned up through the estate's formal records request. A printed exchange that had been forwarded to the estate file by Gerald's own office because it was relevant to the authentication question on my father's signature, Marcus and my mother. The timestamps were from 13 months ago, a month before the disbursement was filed. I read it slowly. My mother had written, "The trust is just sitting there. Dorothy would have wanted you to use it." Marcus had written back, "What about Claire's half?" My mother's response, "Claire doesn't even know the details. She never asked. I'll handle it." Then, Marcus, 3 messages later, after some back and forth about the LLC structure. "What if she finds out eventually?" My mother, "By then it won't matter. It'll be spent, and there's nothing to undo." I read it twice, then I read it a 3rd time because my brain kept trying to find an interpretation that wasn't the one in front of me. There it was. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding, not a trustee acting in confused good faith, a decision, made in writing, to take something that belonged to me because I was the one who didn't ask questions, because I was the one who had been trained to trust the people managing things I wasn't supposed to ask about directly. I called Marcus the next morning. I did not ease into it. I had learned from 31 years of easing into things with my family that it didn't change where you ended up. It just added distance. "I need to talk to you about the trust," I said. The silence on his end was the kind with texture. Not surprised. Bracing. "What about it?" he said. "The disbursement. The $48,000. The Nevada LLC that dissolved in 7 months. He exhaled. "Claire, did you know it was my money? It was a family trust. It was half mine. Grandma structured it specifically. You knew. Mom's messages make that very clear." Another silence. A different quality this time. "Things were tight," he said. And something about the casualness of it, the way he said it like that, was a sentence that ended itself, made the back of my neck go hot. I had an opportunity. It made sense. For a company that lasted 7 months, things didn't work out. Marcus. My voice was very even. I was using my CPA voice, the one I use when I'm reviewing something with a client who already knows what I'm about to say. The boat. Is that where it went? The pause was long enough to be an answer. I needed that money, he said. You have Ryan. You have a good job. You're fine. I almost laughed. I had heard different words say the same thing before. You have enough. You'll be okay. You don't need it like I do. As if having a stable life was the same as not being owed what was mine. Are you going to pay it back? I asked. It's not that simple. Actually, I said. It is. He said my name again, softer this time. The big brother voice I had spent my whole childhood interpreting as warmth and had only recently started reading as management. Don't do something that's going to blow up this family. I looked at Ryan across the kitchen. He was watching me with that steady, protective expression that I had come to understand meant, I've got you, even if this gets complicated. I'm not blowing anything up, I told Marcus. I'm just cleaning up what was already broken. The family dinner had been scheduled 3 weeks before any of this, my parents' 35th anniversary, a restaurant in Dublin that my father had picked because it reminded him of somewhere they'd gone on their honeymoon. My mother had sent the invitation in a group message with a string of heart emojis. The whole family was expected: aunts, uncles, cousins, my grandmother's brother, 43 people. I almost canceled. Ryan and I talked about it for 2 evenings, running, sitting at the kitchen table, the way we seemed to do most of our important conversations. The city going dark outside the window, while we thought through every version of what might happen. He told me I didn't have to do anything I wasn't ready for. I told him I'd been not ready for 31 years, and it had gotten me nowhere. We went. The restaurant was warm and loud in the way anniversary parties are loud. The particular volume of people who haven't seen each other in a while, trying to cover the silence of what they don't know about each other anymore. My mother looked beautiful. She hugged me like everything was normal. My father shook Ryan's hand with the warmth of someone who did not yet know what Ryan had spent the last 2 weeks doing. Marcus arrived with his girlfriend and smiled at me from across the room. The smile of someone who has decided to act as though nothing happened and is betting I'll do the same. I smiled back. Ryan was quiet through the drinks, quiet through the appetizers. He talked to my aunt about her garden. He talked to my father's college friend about the Buckeyes. He was attentive and present and entirely himself. And if you had been watching him, you would have thought he was simply having a nice dinner. When the main course was being cleared and people were settling into the loose, conversational ease of a meal that's winding down, he stood up. He didn't tap a glass. He didn't do anything theatrical. He just stood, and the people nearest to him turned, and then the people beyond them turned. And within about 30 seconds, the table was doing what large family tables do. When one person stands with intention, it went quiet by degrees, section by section, until it was completely silent. My mother was smiling in anticipation. She thought this was a toast. Ryan said, I want to thank Richard and Pamela for this evening and for 35 years of building this family. He nodded toward my parents. A few people started to raise their glasses. Then he said, before we finish, there are some things this family needs to see. He opened the folder he had brought in his laptop bag, the one I had watched him prepare the night before, organized with the particular care he brought to things that mattered. He pulled out the stack of documents, copies, carefully made, enough for the table. 11 years ago, he said, Dorothy set up a trust for her 2 grandchildren. Some of you knew about it, some of you didn't. He looked at my grandmother's brother at the end of the table. The old man nodded once, barely. The trust was structured to give both Claire and Marcus $50,000 each for a major life purchase. My mother's smile had changed. 14 months ago, Ryan continued, $48,000 was dispersed from Claire's half of that trust. The stated reason was a qualifying business investment for a Nevada LLC registered to Marcus. He set copies in front of the people closest to him, and they began passing them down. That LLC was dissolved 7 months later with no documented business activity and no repayment to the trust. The sound in the room was the sound of 37 people absorbing something they had not come to dinner expecting to absorb. The disbursement, he said. and his voice remained exactly as calm as it had been since he stood up. The way it sounds when he's in a courtroom and he knows exactly where the evidence goes, was approved with a signature that the estate's attorney has flagged for authentication review. The co-trustee authorization required by the trust document does not appear to have been properly obtained. My father had gone very still. My mother said Ryan. Just his name. Like she could stop it. He looked at her. Not unkindly. Pamela, I'm sorry, but this money belonged to Claire. Your mother built it for her. He paused. And it was taken while Claire was never told it was at risk. Someone at the far end of the table let out a slow breath. A cousin. She looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at the document in her hands. Marcus had his arms folded. His jaw was tight. He was looking at the table. Ryan reached into the folder one more time and set a single sheet near the center of the table, the printed text exchange, the one with my mother's words on it. He didn't read it aloud. He just let it sit there. Available. Clear. I don't know who picked it up first. I just heard the silence change from still to heavy. My mother's voice came out smaller than I had ever heard it. We were going to... Mom, my own voice surprised me. I hadn't planned to speak. Don't. She looked at me. Don't tell me you were going to fix it. Don't tell me it was complicated. Don't tell me it was a family decision. I felt Ryan's hand settle briefly on my shoulder and then step back, because he understood that this part was mine. Grandma built that for me. She saved it carefully. She made sure it would be there for something real. And you let it go to a boat. The word boat landed in the room with a specific weight. Marcus's girlfriend looked at him. He didn't look at her. My father said my name. Low, warning. The verdict voice I had heard my whole life. I had spent 31 years hearing that voice and adjusting my posture accordingly. I didn't adjust anything. I have loved this family, I said, and my voice cracked once, and then held. I have shown up. I have asked for nothing. I have made myself small enough to fit in whatever space was left over after everyone made sure Marcus was comfortable. And I did it because I thought that was what love looked like in this family. I looked at my mother. You taught me that. You taught me that keeping the peace was the same as being good. I felt the heat behind my eyes and I let it be there without blinking it away. Grandma taught me something different. She told me, the people worth keeping are the ones who show up when there's nothing in it for them. My voice steadied. She showed up for me for 31 years. And then you took what she left me. The room did not recover its volume. It sat in that new quiet, the way rooms sit in quiet after something true has been said out loud for the first time in a space that had been organized for years around not saying it. My aunt, my mother's older sister, a woman I had always found slightly terrifying in her directness, looked at my mother for a long time. Then she said simply, Pamela. And my mother looked away. Ryan had been in contact with Gerald before the dinner. The demand letter had been drafted. It specified full restitution to the trust, restoration of the account structure, and a formal accounting of all prior trustee actions going back 5 years. It was ready. The morning after the anniversary dinner, while I sat in our kitchen in yesterday's clothes, drinking the best coffee I had ever tasted, Ryan sent it. The response from my parents came in several forms over the following weeks. My mother called and left messages that came in stages: first wounded, then pleading, then defensive, then back to wounded. She used the word embarrassed, the way people use it when they mean guilty but are not ready to say so. She said I had aired family business to family, which she seemed to think was a category violation. She said Ryan had been inappropriate. She said things that I recognized, word for word, from other conversations I had watched her navigate toward her preferred outcome. My father sent one message. It said, "This isn't who we raised you to be." I looked at that sentence for a long time. Then I thought about my grandmother's ledger. I thought about her saying the people who show up when there's nothing in it for them. I thought about the fact that my father had apparently signed a document he later could not recall signing, and that his own estate attorney was now reviewing his signature. I typed back, "I know exactly who you raised me to be. That's the problem." Marcus called once. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 4 minutes long and covered, in order, how stressed he had been last year, how the business opportunity had felt real at the time, how I had never been the type to care about money, and finally, How disappointing it was that I was choosing this. Choosing, he said, as if I had selected confrontation from a menu of equally appealing options. As if the choice were mine. I did not call him back. The restitution agreement was signed 6 weeks after the dinner. It took 3 rounds of negotiation. Ryan handled every exchange with the detached precision of someone who does this for other people's families every day and had the particular advantage of having built the entire case himself. The money was returned to a restructured account with new trustee provisions that required an independent third-party fiduciary for any future disbursement. My name was the only beneficiary. Marcus had already received his share, which legally was a separate matter. Gerald's office had completed the signature review. The findings were exactly what Ryan had expected. The anniversary dinner was the last time I saw my parents. That's not a dramatic statement. I'm not performing it. It's just where things are. Currently, in the ordinary, unglamorous way that family estrangements actually exist, not in one clean break, but in a series of silences that gradually solidify into something structural. My mother sends occasional messages, brief, cautious, like a person testing ice with one foot before committing their weight. I respond sometimes. I keep it short. There is a version of my mother I loved genuinely and still do somewhere underneath the specific disappointment of knowing what she was willing to do. Those are not incompatible things, I have learned. You can love someone and understand clearly that they cannot be trusted with what matters to you. My grandmother's brother called me in October. He said he had been at the dinner. He said he had known for a long time that something wasn't right with the trust, which was why he had pulled me aside at the funeral, but that he hadn't felt it was his place to make the accusation himself. He said Dorothy would have been proud of me. I thanked him, and then I sat in the car in the parking lot of the grocery store where I'd taken the call, and I cried in the particular way you cry when someone says something that costs nothing to say and means absolutely everything. Ryan and I are using the trust for a house. That's what my grandmother intended, something real, she said. And a house is real. We found one last month with a yard that gets good afternoon light and a kitchen with more counter space than I've ever had and a room that will be, someday, something I am not ready to say out loud quite yet, but that I think about when I walk through it. People sometimes ask me if I regret how the dinner went. They ask it carefully. The way people ask about decisions that required courage they're not sure they would have had themselves. They want to know if I wish it had been quieter. More private, less witnessed. I tell them the truth. For 31 years, I carried a version of my family's story that had been written for me. The version where I was fine, where I was stable, where I asked for nothing because I needed nothing, where my silence was the same as peace. I carried it carefully and I kept it intact, and it kept everyone comfortable except me. My grandmother wrote down who showed up. She wrote it in a ledger with a pen she kept on her nightstand, and she showed it to me once and told me it mattered. She built something real, and she put my name on it, and she trusted the people I had been taught to trust with the details. And on a Thursday night in a restaurant in Dublin, Ohio, with 43 people at a long table and the remnants of an anniversary dinner in front of them, my husband stood up and did the thing my family had spent 31 years teaching me not to do. He put the truth on the table, not loudly. Not cruelly, not for drama, just because it was true, and the people in that room deserved to see it, and I deserved, for once in my life, to not be the only one holding it. I didn't stop loving my family that night. I stopped managing them. That's a different thing, and it turns out it takes up a lot less of you. The house has a good yard. The light in the afternoon comes through the kitchen window and lands on the counter in a wide, warm strip. The kind my grandmother had in her house in Dayton, the kind I spent Saturday mornings sitting near as a kid while she made coffee and wrote in her ledger and told me in her calm, unhurried way that a good head was worth keeping. I think I'm finally starting to use mine.